Hello, and thanks so much for joining us on this momentous evening when the United States Senate is voting on a new Supreme Court justice, and we are only a week away from the final day of voting on the future of our country and the future of the Equal Rights Amendment. A reminder that we are recording this town hall for future viewing, and we're running live on the eracoalition.org Facebook page where it will be available for viewing as well. And hello, I'm Carol Jenkins. I'm president and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality. We are 115 organizations across the country working to amend the Constitution. Tonight on this, our 8th town hall of this year, 2020 has been quite a year, we will tackle the ERA and LGBTQIA+ rights. As many of you know, the effort to amend the Constitution to include sex equality began nearly a century ago. Our renewed efforts now include Black, Indigenous, and women of color, gender nonconforming and transgender women and girls, and non-binary people. We believe that these are the most impacted by systemic inequities now, and we all need to work together for a totally equal future in the United States of America. We are so fortunate to have a great panel and Drew Lavasser as our moderator. Drew is a member of our board of directors here at the Coalition and the Fund. He is Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the LGBT Bar Association. He leads the Lavender Law Coaching and Consulting programs and was former director of Lambda Legal's Transgender Rights Project. Drew, thanks so much for moderating for us tonight and for all of the fabulous work you do.
Thank you, Carol. I'm so excited to be here with you all. Thank you for tuning in. I am so proud to be a member of the board of directors for the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality. Glad that it's organized by and led by amazing women of color like Carol Jenkins, our CEO, and also our board chairs, Mona Sinha and Kimberly Peeler-Allen. We, as Carol said, we believe in equal rights for all women. And when we say women, which women do we mean? We mean all women, and fighting for people of all genders, including all trans people, non-binary people, everyone gender non-conforming. Our work is intersectional, inclusive, and we believe in the collective effort and action and power of community to enforce change and amplifying the most underrepresented voices to lay the foundation for equality for all. I'm an openly transgender attorney with a background in women and gender studies, and my entire career has been focused on achieving equality for all people on the basis of sex. I've been litigating cases on behalf of trans people, working to end discrimination and violence against trans and non-binary people, particularly the epidemic of violence against trans women of color. I'm now doing that work with the LGBT bar. This panel is so important to the conversation about equal rights. LGBTQIA+ people have been historically underrepresented, face severe discrimination, and have been under attack by this current government. We've seen a record number of murders this year, particularly of Black transgender women, and the numbers have surpassed 2019 by July this year already. The movements for women's equality and the LGBTQIA+ rights are not separate movements. We are all in this together. And I am so excited to have you all hear from these esteemed panelists tonight. We are obviously going to kick it off with our beloved Senator Pat Spearman out of Nevada, who has championed both the ERA as well as marriage equality, as well as Nevada's trans-inclusive hate crimes law. Senator Spearman, thank you for your work connecting race, LGBTQ+ status, veterans, and gender justice for our communities. Can you say why you believe it is critical to have this intersectional approach that you've taken in our work?
Thank you, Drew, and all the esteemed panelists who are here. I'm honored to be here with you, and for those who are joining us in Facebook land, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is very important because whenever you're talking about equality, the people who oppose equality, and it doesn't matter equality for who, Okay, it's a fill in the blank thing when you start talking about equality. You know, if they don't want equality for African Americans, take them out and you can put women in. You know, take women out and you can put seniors in. So it's about equality, and but more importantly, I think what the opponents of equality, and I'll add equity to that. Okay, because the inequality for so long has led us to a deficit in terms of where we are starting from. And each one of us, depending upon what part of the alphabet we're in, we start at a deficit. So first of all, I think the most common one is race. And for what we don't understand, many people don't understand about race is that it's a contrived construct. I mean, it really is. There's no such thing as race, but it's a contrived construct that is only useful when you're perpetuating structures that keep people apart and to keep people in secondary citizenship. So race doesn't even exist. But for the sake of this argument, it does. And so the first thing that people want to do is they want to pit, well, if you're for the ERA, well, what about Black women? You know, Black women would never, well, no, we're not going to have that conversation, okay? Well, you're for the ERA. Well, what about LGBTQ? We're not going to have that conversation right now either, okay? Well, you're for the ERA, what about? And I tell them, I say, listen, look at me, okay? I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I'm a same gender loving woman. Okay, so when I walk into the room, all those constructs that you have put together, all right, I defy them. My very existence defies them. So when you want to talk about equality, I don't care what the alphabets, I don't care what the constructs are. You don't want to talk about equality. I fight for this because if one part of me is free, all of me can be free. And that's why it's so important. That's why it's so important. There's no daylight between equality for women, equality for members of the LGBTQ community, equality for our seniors. There's no daylight for me between any of that. It's all one thing. It's about equality, period.
Beautiful. Wow. Chills. Kate Kelly, an activist, feminist, human rights lawyer who has done important work connecting the LGBTQ+ movement and women's rights movement. Can you please talk to us about queer history of the ERA and how the ERA movement is a queer movement?
Yeah, thanks for being here, everybody. I'm also so honored to be on this panel, particularly to follow Senator Spearman, who is part of this queer history of the Equal Rights Amendment. I think it's important to start off by saying that there would be no Equal Rights Amendment without queer people in this country. You know, from the earliest days to the folks who even wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, we can't say conclusively whether or not Alice Paul was queer, but I will say that she never married, and she only ever had one male suitor, and she had a life fully filled with women and women's causes. So I don't know what her love life was like, but I'm gonna go ahead and call her queer. We also have Paulie Murray. Paulie Murray, a Black, posthumously now called transgender person who was really the architect, the intellectual architect of a lot of the legal landscape, including, but not limited to, women's inclusion under the 14th Amendment. So the whole Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the basis of sex, her work, you know, the late Justice Ginsburg, her work was inspired by this person, Paulie Murray. Paulie Murray also testified in support of the Equal Rights Amendment and the extension in the 1970s. So you have queer and transgender folks from the very beginning of this movement, pushing it along, authoring the very concepts upon which the Equal Rights Amendment rests. We also have Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan was, at the time, a closeted lesbian, first Black woman elected from Texas to the House of Representatives. Barbara Jordan was a big proponent of the Equal Rights Amendment, also testified in support of the extension, and had a lifelong partner and was known to many people, including her family, to be a lesbian. We also have Pat Spearman, who is here today on this panel. So we have living history. Pat, as she said, is an incredible out lesbian woman, first out legislator in Nevada, and really resurrected the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, even those of us who were in the Equal Rights Amendment movement at the time, the small and few and brave folks who were just, out, felt like we were out in the wilderness. Well, Pat brought us out of the wilderness and into the light, and helped get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified in 2017. And then I'll also mention Danica Rome. Danica Rome first seated transgender woman legislator in the country, in the state of Virginia. And Danica was really the whip for the Equal Rights Amendment in the state of Virginia. There were also incredible Black leaders, both Jennifer Carroll Foy and Jennifer McClellan, who were the chief patrons of the Equal Rights Amendment in the House and Senate in Virginia, the final state to ratify. But Danica played a really key role. And Danica I remember seeing her in the Virginia state legislature, and she had a pendant from the Equal Rights Amendment that her mother had worn in the 1970s. And so Danica, this incredible pioneering trans legislator, brought the Equal Rights Amendment across the threshold that the Article 5 requires. Danica also tattooed the Equal Rights Amendment on her bicep in celebration. So Danica is just really the embodiment of what the movement is now. And I think it's important to say unequivocally that there would be no Equal Rights Amendment without queer women, queer people.
Thank you. Amazing. Victoria Kirby York, Acting Director of the Advocacy and Action Department of the National LGBT Task Force. As a so-called elder millennial, your words, can you please bring some historical perspective in addition to what Kate has shared from your work, your background, and maybe touch on some of the experiences of Gen Z?
Yes. So first I have to thank Senator Spearman. I think as someone shared it in our thread before the event, that Paulie Murray and Barbara Jordan advocated for the Equal Rights Amendment, and Senator Spearman resurrected it. And I just thought, don't remember which of you to attribute that quote to, but it stuck with me. So I just want to say thank you for showing up as unapologetically who you are and all of who you are, as you mentioned. And Kate, love kind of how you threaded the needle around, two communities that in the early parts of the ERA fight there was a lot of strategy around excluding Black women and trans women. And to kind of get us centered in the beginning of this conversation from a Black woman resurrecting this fight, Senator Spearman, to a trans woman helping to finish the fight, so to speak. It was just so beautiful. So thank you both for throwing us right on into this conversation in beautiful ways. So I want to talk about this generational piece that was added into this question. Me and my friends joke about being elder millennials because we see a difference between those of us born in the 80s and those who were born not knowing life without a cell phone and the internet. Those of us born in the 80s remember not having those things. So there's like the internet and the digital divide tends to kind of divide our experiences in our generation. And I will never forget the 2008 election for as long as I live. It was the first election where I was able to cast a ballot for president. I turned 18 a week after the 2004 race. So it's my first time being able to vote, and watching the primary play out between what could have been, what ended up being the first Black president of the United States and what could have been the first woman president of the United States really left some jarring imprints on my life. There were so many experiences as a Black woman leader who's also same gender loving that I attributed often throughout my life to my race. That in watching that campaign play out and watching Secretary Clinton kind of deal with some of the sexist comments made in the media from competitors, from opponents, from folks out in the real world, all made me have this realization as a young person that sex had been a barrier in ways that I never really grappled with before. It occurred to me, as it does some of my Gen Z colleagues and other millennials, that, oh, well, you know, so much possibility is ripe out there for our generation. So of course a woman could become president. It didn't really hit us that there had never been a woman president, and that there was something historic and different about that moment, different than some of the kind of racial ramifications. I know for me, I thought the country had come further on the issue of sex than it had on the issue of race. And that primary was my first awakening to realizing that my worldview was not quite where the facts of the case were, so to speak. And so, you know, over the last, 12, 13 years, I've watched as sex discrimination has played out in my life and in the life of other folks in my generation, and how there's so many places, including the presidency, where women still have not ascended, still have not broken through that glass ceiling. And the Equal Rights Amendment was something that, to be honest with you, until a volunteer, I started my career working in electoral politics, working to re-elect President Obama in 2011, 2012. I worked on the gubernatorial race in Florida. And, I'd gotten my master's degree in public administration. I'd been in constitutional law 1 and 2. I considered myself pretty up with it as it related to the Constitution. I had read it, several times for coursework and for fun. And until a volunteer outside of a campaign event with a huge now sign came up to me and said, it was one of those surrogate events where President Obama was coming out to speak right before the election, kind of like some of the events that are happening right now around the country. And she interrupted what I was doing, trying to get folks into the event safely, all of that, to say, did you know that sex isn't protected in the Constitution? And I had this moment where there was this realization that had not hit me, not through my times at Howard University and school or since, that sex was not protected, and that there was a need for the Equal Rights Amendment. And in my work currently at the task force fighting for the Equality Act, it became even clearer to me as we look at the gaps and protections in the law that, sex isn't included in public accommodation protections right now. And so, and in a number of other types of civil rights protections. And so this elder millennial had a moment, the light bulb went off that said, wow, there is something wrong with our nation when a whole entire half of our country does not have protections in all aspects of our life. So I know there are others who've got lots to say, and we're gonna have a lively discussion tonight. But I think, there has been this generational divide, and I'm glad that more and more millennials and Gen Zers are joining the fight to make the Equal Rights Amendment happen.
Thank you, Victoria. Amazing. Charlotte Clymer, activist, writer, and former press secretary for HRC, as well as a proud Army veteran. Something that you say is, you cannot have queer equality without gender equality. Yet tensions exist between these two movements, particularly around us trans people. How can we be doing better?
Okay, well, first of all, let me just say it's such an honor to be invited to speak in this group. I feel like I'm a candle being invited to a group of bonfires. And so it's just really wonderful to be in this company. Senator Spearman, of course, who's a living icon, and Kate Kelly, who I thought I knew a lot about the area already, but she has taught me so much more. So thank you for that, Kate. And of course, Victoria, my fellow elder millennial. Andrea, thank you so much for all you've done. And of course, Ms. Jenkins, for your leadership of ERA and just this great organization. And Drew, thank you so much for your moderation. I am gobsmacked by this, I would say, idea that there is pervasive and ongoing tension between queer equality and gender equality, between those who are women's rights activists as a way of life and those who are mainly in the field of LGBTQ equality. I would not be here were it not for a number of amazing women, particularly from Texas, whether it was my own grandmother or former Governor Ann Richards or former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. I come from a proud tradition of strong women, but at the same time, I come from a long line of incredible trans women who paved the way. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, people like Laverne Cox and Janet Mock, Sarah McBride, Danica Rome, all the people who made it easier for me to come out and to be who I am and to live authentically in my own skin. But I don't distinguish between the two. I mean, all these women are a part of me, and all of them, beyond the shadow of a doubt, would support me in my own skin. You look at the data, and the vast majority of cisgender women who are polled on this firmly support trans equality. They firmly support the idea that trans women are women. I think it is important to recognize the historic discrimination and the historic barriers to having an inclusive, diverse movement for gender equality. But at the same time, I have to tell you that I have never gone to an ERA event and felt anything but comfortable and accepted and affirmed in my own skin. And I think it's really important to push right now, because Republicans would love nothing more than to drive a wedge between the LGBTQ equality movement and those who are fighting for the ongoing justice of gender equality. We need to reject that completely. We need to call that out for the lie that it is. And we need to just communicate to the American people that there is a deep, deep need for the ERA. And that these, all the groups that would benefit from it have been working together to fight for it, that we are not enemies toward this common goal. And I'll tell you what else. I think that the education part of this is so critically important. There is not a political person my age who has not seen that episode of The West Wing where they discussed the Equal Rights Amendment and how terribly written it was. And the idea that the Equal Protection Clause would be a meaningful substitute for that. No less than Justice Scalia has said that the Constitution does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. And all of these great LGBTQ court cases that have happened so far, and the ones to come, by the way, they all go right through the idea that LGBTQ people are only protected on the basis of sex as an intermediate scrutiny, or excuse me, as an intermediate protected class, not as a strict scrutiny class. So if we don't get the ERA, we're essentially saying that the Constitution can continue putting on these Band-Aids, or the justices can put on the Band-Aids, and that we're not going to get to where we need to be. I'll close with this. I don't see any tension whatsoever between getting the Equality Act passed and getting the ERA passed. The Equality Act is a piece of legislation that would ban all federal non-discrimination, all discrimination against LGBTQ people at the federal level. The Equality Act is how we get to the moon, but the Equal Rights Amendment is how we live there. That's how we get those protections enshrined for all people, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of sex, regardless of gender expression. And it doesn't just protect LGBTQ people. It protects all people, regardless of gender identity, regardless of who they are, trans, cis, whatever. The cisgender woman who presents more masculine than typical, she could be fired from a job in many states because she does not conform to these patriarchal, excuse my language, but frankly, bullshit standards for how a cisgender woman should present. We're fighting for her too. We're fighting for all people. And so it's so important that we don't take this bait, that we refuse to recognize this ridiculous propaganda that trans people and ERA activists are against each other. We are one and the same. This is one fight that we're in right now, and we're going to get this done, but only if we come together and do it. Thank you.
Beautiful. And finally, Commissioner Andrea Shorter serves on the Commission for the Status of Women for the City of San Francisco, the longest running term for a commissioner, and is in her 21st year. Thank you for your work. Can you talk about the work you have done over the many years, particularly how your work has centered queer girls and how it has served as a model, not just for California, but for the entire country and beyond?
I'm now unmuted and unleashed. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to participate on this just dynamic panel. I'm a fan of every single person on today's panel, and we've got work to do, don't we? And the work never stops. I think that one of the most problematic words in the language of democracy is equality. It's equality. I think that the fact that there are founding documents, the founding or the forefathers or what have you historically, I don't know that they could have possibly imagined anything past the idea of equality really between white male property owners. That's really what they were talking about. But the real test of our democracy continues in terms of how we work towards expanding and being inclusive. And I'm really relishing and have been looking forward to this moment for some time. I came out in the 1980s in college as a silence equals death kid. So I could see then the lack of response to our brothers and sisters that were facing HIV/AIDS. And I think that's really where some of my journey began in terms of looking at these issues of access, freedom, equality, and what it means to be living in a democratic society. Prior to that, though, I was definitely influenced and had the pleasure and the honor of later meeting and being something of a mentee of folks like Eileen Hernandez and Dylan Phyllis and Roma Guy in San Francisco. And I want to honor them today as well. So I was a young kid and seeing women on national television fighting for the ERA in the 1970s and folks like Gloria Steinem and others. And it impacted me. I began to look then as a young Black child in Indianapolis, Indiana. That's where I am from. And really began to look around in terms of what it meant to be a woman child, what it meant to be a girl child in American society, as well as what it meant to be a Black child, and then eventually what it meant to be a queer child. So as far as the work that I have done over the years, I've not only worked for the California Assembly Legislature, I've also been working in the LGBT community, our movement and various organizations. I've run the Names Project Foundation, which is the AIDS Memorial Quilt. Worked for marriage equality through Equality California and other organizations. And as of late, have worked for Out and Equal Workplace Advocates, which works on the issues of inclusion and diversity for LGBT people in the workplace. But along the way, I've also worked as I've also been I'm a former president of the National Organization for Women's chapter in San Francisco. And it was really there that we began to do some work investigating the issues of what was happening with queer identified young women in the juvenile justice system and throughout the city and county of San Francisco. And so one of the things that we were able to do was certainly get people to start talking about the issue. I think that the idea in San Francisco is that everyone is queer and everyone is happy and everyone, is equally represented. So therefore, it's a panacea, it's a utopia. And how, what do you mean that there are issues and there are problems? And clearly, and one of my colleagues at the time is Rachel Pfeiffer, who is the COO of ERA Coalition. And my goodness, what a tremendous contribution she has made in that movement. But working together with her and others, certainly not only trying to identify, but give voice to and empower these young women, these young queer identified girls, help to elevate their voice in terms of what their needs were, not only the challenges that they were facing in the systems, be that in the juvenile justice system, be that in foster care or child welfare, but also in our public schools systems in terms of the ways that they were being discriminated against, the ways in which they were being treated, and in fact, quite abusive situations. But I think that where we are right now, in terms of moving forward with this movement that is so very important, I think at this day and age, it's critical. It is critical. I wanted to go back a little bit to some of the things that Victoria was sharing as an elder millennial. We have some reintroducing to do to this generation in terms of what the ERA is about. And certainly I agree with Charlotte that there should be no competition whatsoever between the ERA, the passage of the ERA, or making that happen, along with equality, the Equality Act. But as we see over the past several, and this year, with COVID, the disparities, the issues that are very salient and undeniable in terms of disparities and inequities, and the disproportionality in terms of how people are not only being impacted by COVID, in terms of how we look at it in terms of race, how we look at it in terms of class, geography, but also by gender as well. And so I think that where we are in this moment, the context is also very important. This too shall pass eventually, but I think that one of the things about this moment is that more people are thinking about the consequences of inequality, the consequences of inequity and disparity, the material consequences of it. And one would hope that at this point in time, when we are, how many days are we out from electing election next Tuesday? So we're about 8 days away. And hopefully we will have a major change in the cast of the White House. And we'll have our first woman and woman of color as a vice president. But we're really looking at, over half of the voters, or about half of the voters, will be women, women identified, female identified persons, but yet do not have the equal protections and the equal rights due to us. So I'm very excited about this particular moment and how we're going to move forward and have this millennial generation take its place in leading this next iteration of the movement.
So powerful. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I have some questions, but I want to open it up in case people had responses or things they want to chime in after hearing everybody speak. So let's have a conversation and I'll chime in with questions when there's a lull.
Hey, Drew.
Yes.
I was very remiss, and I want to apologize to her or anyone who knows her that might be listening. I did not know that there was a possibility for the ERA to be resurrected. And it was a direct result of a woman by the name of Helen DeBassiere Swanson, who had promised her mother-in-law, I think her mother-in-law's name was Katrina, that she would work to get it done, and walked across the country. One of the places that she stopped was in Nevada, and she spoke to a friend of mine, Jeanette Dean, and Jeanette Dean told me about it. So I always want to make sure that the people, the chain of people who helped this to get where it is, I want to make sure that I give them the gratitude and the honor that they deserve.
Thank you. Thank you for modeling that for the rest of us too.
I wanted to just jump in and say since we're honoring people doing incredible work, that there is a group of Gen Z, really just phenomenal Gen Z teenagers who are working on the Equal Rights Amendment. They're called Generation Ratify. It was founded by two 15-year-old girls who obviously can't vote, but they can influence policy. They're incredibly organized. I think they have chapters in over 20 states now, specifically focused on the Equal Rights Amendment. And I just, when they approached me to kind of support their organization, I was blown away. I absolutely love Gen Z. They're the best thing about America. You know, when I was a 15-year-old girl, I was definitely not calling senators and organizing political campaigns and going to the Supreme Court to do a demonstration and text banking and phone banking. And these girls and all of their allies are doing an incredible job. So we have a lot to hope for when it comes to Gen Z. And a lot of the folks in Gen Z are also queer. And I will say that the question that I get when I speak to anyone younger than basically my age, which is 40, is the first question they ask is, will the Equal Rights Amendment cover trans people? And so I see this very hopeful, generation, this really active generation, really laser focused on the people who are most vulnerable. And that's what they always care about. And so I think it's really important as a movement, you know, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also strategically, if we want to get folks who are young involved, we have to teach them, as Andrea said, we have to teach them about the Equal Rights Amendment, how it will cover. So most certainly it will cover, and we do want it to cover trans people and gender creative folks.
Yes. I think it's so much, the sharing of stories across generation is so important. Like for me, that was the part that really aided in me kind of getting it right. I had a Helen too. Talked about Helen. There's something about people named Helen, you know, I gotta say. You know, who was in her late 60s or early 70s, was office manager on one of the campaigns that I worked for. And she stopped me in the hall one day. It was in the middle of a whole lot going on on the campaigns. I really was just trying to move right past her at the time, not to be rude. I just was like, I gotta go make sure my staff have what they need. I love you, but I gotta go. And I saw tears in her eyes, and you know, so I slowed my roll to ask, you know, what's going on, like what's happening, you know. And she grabbed my hands and looked me in the face and just said, when I was 18 years old, I could have never imagined you. And you know, she was this older white lady. I was this at the time 20-something, you know, Black, you know, lesbian kid, you know, in her mind, working at this office. And she said, you know, when I was coming up, women had two options. You were going to either be a nurse or a teacher, and that was it. If you left the home at all, right? And you know, definitely different for, you know, women of color. You know, I know my ancestors, you know, had some other options that were much different. We talk about on a different panel, but you know, when she shared that with me, she also talked about what abortion access was like in her day, and having to, you know, go down an alley and deal with hangers. And before she shared that, I just kind of heard it being said on the airwaves. And in my mind, it seemed so extreme that it couldn't be real, you know? But hearing her, you know, so passionately share with me her experiences and what it was like to be a woman, you know, at that point, 50, 60, a person my age, 50, you know, some years ago, was illuminating. And I think those kind of sharing of stories can help us all shift our context differently. I think there are things that my generation takes for granted. You know, even when I see folks who are getting married today, like it's nothing. I know when me and my wife got married the first time, you know, it was, you know, it wasn't legal. Like, you know, when we did get our marriage certificate in Florida, you know, I was registered as the groom, right? And you know, I laughed that our marriage certificate will be a relic one day of like old times. They'll say groom and bride.
Yeah.
But you know, our context shift even in a decade, right? Like that's just in a decade.
That's
And
right.
you know, the sharing of those experiences, I think, can really help ground us in really meaningful ways. And so I hope, you know, my folks my age and younger are having conversations with their grandparents, their moms, their older sisters, you know, and vice versa, so that we can all really understand um, our history, our context, but also what's at stake. Because if all you've known is progress in a certain way, your imagination is only that it's going to get better, right? You can't fathom that it could get worse. And it can, you know, rights are taken away, can be taken away. Ask the folks who were, well, I guess we can't ask them directly, they're not here anymore. But I think often to 1896, like after Reconstruction, you know, the moment where there were the most people of color elected across the country ever, and then Plessy versus Ferguson happens, and the separate but equal doctrine happens. And there was a backwards move for our country for nearly 6 decades. And so backwards can happen, it has happened. And sharing that context helps to remind people what's at stake every election. And the Equal Rights Amendment is definitely something that's at stake in the election that's going to happen next week.
And you know what I want to deal with, because 2 or 3 of my colleagues on this panel have mentioned it, and that is how people want to excise transgender women specifically out of the fight for the ERA. And I remember last year in, I think it was April, when we went to Congress to advocate for the ERA. And here's the elephant in the room, literally, okay? Literally. The elephant in the room was this. Everyone who was on the side of the elephants always brought up, so will this mean that transgender people will be able to go into the bathroom and they'll be scaring our little girls, and you know, and what about all the things that they could do in the bathroom? And I'll tell you, if I were not saved and sanctified and a pastor, a former pastor, I had some words that I really wanted to use, and you know, it wasn't French, but I think people would have recognized them. But you know, but it took everything in me to say to them, look, you all are going after the wrong group. It's not transgender women who are in the bathroom luring young people. Okay, you need to get your own house in order. People who live in glass houses should not be throwing stones and should not be living over by a rock quarry. Okay, so the elephant in the room is they want to again separate us, those of us who have been marginalized. They want to separate us based on some superficial thing that they don't understand. And I say it like this, because they don't have the intellectual prowess to string together the words for a cogent argument, nor are they anatomically equipped to deal with what we're talking about. I'm talking about in reality. Then they come up with these facetious arguments that are admirable for their asininity alone. And absent asinine, there is no redeeming value of them. And so we need to call it like it is, and be willing to stand up and say to them, this has nothing whatsoever to do with it, okay? And call it like it is. It was somebody in your house that was arrested for being in the bathroom. And, and their defense was they had a wide stance. So you can miss me on that.
Preach, Pastor. Yeah, you know, this issue of marginalization, Senator. It's interesting how you know, I think that one of the tensions that we are facing right now is this issue of a fear, and this really gets more racial, a fear of a majority minority. Right? That's the fear that people that are racialized, people that are people of color, people that are queer, right? You know, women who can think for themselves and do for themselves, as we always have. It's that fear. And so there's always through history efforts, laws, ordinances to criminalize, right? Not just marginalize, but to criminalize women who act or behave, badly behaving women, okay? We could be criminalized as lesbians. Not that long ago, within our lifetimes, some of us, maybe a little bit before others, for wearing the wrong garments, for male garments, right? You could be arrested. Same thing with gay men, but criminalized for behaviors or some action, criminalized as Black folks. We can go all day in terms of the inequities in terms of how law is applied on very similar or same offense between Black folks, other folks, white folks, Latin folks, and white folks. Criminalized. So there's always this effort. It's not just the marginalization, but to justify marginalization as criminalizing things that are other than white, male, cisgender, and therefore their privilege. So again, the quest, as I said before, is in our democracy. We are very, very serious inflection point, and I have complete faith that we're going to move through it and we're going to transcend because of this kind of coalition. I cannot imagine having a movement to ratify and to bring to complete fruition the ERA without transgender activists. I just can't. I really can't. Now, I just want to say that we are the only commission that I know of, and there are not a great deal of commissions on the status of women that exist in municipalities. Of course, San Francisco is a municipality and a county. But clearly, there's a great deal of history about our existence. But we're the only commission, to my knowledge, that has actually had an appointment by the mayor of a transgender, a trans woman. And this has been a few years ago, but certainly even then, it caused a little people were like, what is that about? Is that possible? What's it mean? But you know what? We said, this is, how can we move forward, in our causes and our issues without our trans sisters? But this issue of marginalizing and criminalizing, we are ready to evolve past that. Those days are numbered. There's no going back. We have to have a no going back approach. And that is being inclusive. Let us dictate, let us determine, and let us define what equality means. I think a lot of the tension is letting someone else determine what equality is. I'm not interested in being equal to someone that, uses the wide stance excuses for not standing with us for equality and inclusion.
And I just want to add, I think, the Equal Rights Amendment often gets framed as a throwback.
Right,
you see like retro pictures, you see only white ladies, you see the green sign, you see, even the image, the images portrayed of the Equal Rights Amendment are always Phyllis Schlafly with her bullhorn. Like even modern stories about the Equal Rights Amendment portray it as though it is a relic from the past. And I think the story that I'm hearing tonight, and the story that I hear when I talk to folks about the Equal Rights Amendment, is that it is not a relic from the past, because it hasn't happened yet. So the fruition of the Equal Rights Amendment is still in the future. Right. But also it is a tool for imagining a future where we do not go back. It is a tool that we are going to use to create the future we want, no matter who's on the Supreme Court, no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in Congress. We are not going back. We are not going to lose these rights. We are going to construct a future that includes us, that is by us, that is for us, that includes trans people, that includes gender nonconforming people, we are going forward. We're not going back. We're not going to lose. We're not going to cede ground to people who want us dead, who don't want us to exist, who don't want us to have voices. Like, we just absolutely will not go back. We're not losing rights. We're constructing a future that includes us and is by us. And I think that, for me, is what the Equal Rights Amendment is about. I'm very inspired today because the Chilean, the women in Chile have voted and created a new constitution. They're going to completely abolish their constitution and write a new constitution that's mandated to be written by 50% men, 50% women. That's never happened before. And I'm very, very inspired by what they're doing. And their slogan was "Never again without women." And I think that can be our slogan, never again. This is literally the process of writing our own constitution and writing ourselves into it. And so I think that can be as expansive as we want it to be. That can be as queer as we want it to be. And that's the true story of what this is.
That is so powerful, Kate. We have a few minutes left. I want to give everybody a chance to say some final words before Carol takes over. But we had a victory this past summer before the Supreme Court that unequivocally says that LGBT people are covered by sex. And so this was part of why we were looking forward to having this town hall tonight. And I just want to answer, what will the ERA do? The constitutional amendment is the most protective way to address the systemic inequities that impact all of us. So final words, we have about 3 minutes left.
If I might, I just thank you. And wow, Kate, I love you. I love everyone here. I just do. Just want to say that, because you open up one other thing, and a final word is that this moment in time is really so critical. I think that part of also is what's happening, and you see this in this presidential election where you have a sitting president who's begging white suburban women to like him and like all of his whatever it is that he thinks that he's about, and they're rejecting it. And some of the objection to the history of objecting the ERA has really been about the idea of protecting and putting on a pedestal the idea of white female gentility. And we need to, and I think that we're past that. And those women, I don't know who he's talking to, some 1950s version of Leave It to Beaver, but they're rejecting it, and we'll see what happens in the polls. But to me, I think that that's just something I also wanted to note. And I also wanted to note, in terms of some of the criminalization of who we are, has also, we've seen that come through the military as well, right? In terms of who can serve and who, the battles around that. So yes, let's move forward. No going back. We can do better. We can evolve, and all the time and energy that has been wasted on not having the ERA, and just think of what we can do moving forward.
If I could really quickly, and I'll be very quick with this story, but last year I gave a talk at a law firm, and it was really, really well done, and it was mostly cis women there, great conversation. And afterward, this woman comes up to me, the cis woman, and she says something to the effect of, "Do you ever speak as a woman about access to abortion? Do you ever talk about getting pregnant? Because you can't get pregnant, right?" And I told her, well, I speak as a woman, but I also speak as an ally to those who need abortion access, because I don't have a uterus. So I speak for those who, speak alongside those who do have a uterus and need abortion access. And I could see her relax a little bit. The tension went up from her body, and she's like, "Okay, thank you. I guess I needed to hear that." I said, "Well, let me ask you a question, if that's okay." And she said, "Sure." And I asked her, "When was the last time, just try to think about it, when was the last time you spoke up for abortion access for transgender men?" And I could see this thing click in her head, as if she suddenly understood a piece of the puzzle she was missing, that she didn't understand it before. And it wasn't a gotcha moment. It wasn't a debate. It was more like these two human beings coming to a place of understanding together. And we really need to have more of those conversations, because our common opponent is not each other. Our common opponent is this patriarchal system held up by people who are all too happy to see us fight each other. And so I just wanted to put that into folks' brains as a seed and let them ruminate on that, because I think that's the future for us all.
And I want to speak to, Charlotte, I'm glad you said that, because, and I guess I need to pull back a little bit, because when people go there, sometimes I want to go there with them in the opposite direction, like, well, bathrooms, will that be? And I'm like, how do you know? When you go into the bathroom, how do you know? Okay, right now, you cannot tell me with any definitive truthfulness that you've been there before. You don't know, unless you're looking under the bathroom door. So you've given me a more elegant way to deal with ignorance, because I think that too is part of our common enemy. So we've reached a time right now where it looks like everything that we have been fighting for may be taken away from us. And I too, I'm going to go back to a military analogy. When you are moving forward on a mission, if you reach a point in time where it looks like the men and women that you are leading have lost their way, and if they can't go further, if they can't go any further, what you do is you look at the problem and you push pause. And so I think that's where we are right now. We're looking at this problem. We're going to push pause, because we will not allow people to make us raggedy and never reach our goal. So it's not a problem. We're going to push pause. And so that's kind of where we are right now. But regardless of what they do with this next Supreme Court justice, we already know that what we're doing is a righteous fight. And when righteousness is on our side, we can't lose with the stuff we use.
Thank you.
Right on.
Yes.
Right on. Right on.
I feel like that was like the perfect closing comment, but I wanted to say one thing.
Please.
Because it's something that's happening the day after the election. And so I know it's going to get lost amid some of the post-election night coverage. The day after the election, there's going to be a Supreme Court oral argument focused on religious exemptions. And much like the use of the trans community to stop the fight for sex protections, the LGBTQ community has been really leveraged by folks on the far right to gut civil rights protections, not just for LGBTQ folks, but for all current protected classes. And I want to be clear that when they say religious exemptions, what they really mean are civil rights exemptions. As a Christian, ain't nothing religious about what they're trying to do. Even the Pope came out to say that LGBTQ people deserve the opportunity to build and raise families. So it really lies open what this is about. And it's important for those folks who care about the Equal Rights Amendment, because we don't know how broad or how narrow they're going to rule on this particular case, but it's going to have implications regardless of how they rule when it comes to civil rights protections in terms of legal precedents for a whole host of issues when it comes to civil rights. So it's the Fulton case out of the city of Philadelphia. Please don't let it get lost in the news cycle. It's happening the day after the election. If you're a person of faith, especially let folks know that this has nothing to do with religion. It's a push to gut civil rights protections for all people, using LGBTQ people again as the wedge, same as what they're doing to stop the Equal Rights Amendment. So pay attention to that. And if you want to learn more about the task force civil rights campaign, please go to the taskforce.org/allofmeallthetime, which is the name of our campaign.
Thank you.
And I know we're short on time. I just wanted to say, if folks want to know more about the specifics of how the ERA is queer and why, Bostock is tied to the Equal Rights Amendment, et cetera, I've written 2 pieces called The ERA is Queer. You can Google those. They're both in the Advocate, and also written a piece with Danica Rome for Teen Vogue about why transgender women and cis women should work together. So if you want to know more about the specifics, which we we talked a high level about, but if you want to know why exactly the Equal Rights Amendment is queer when it comes to legally speaking, go ahead and check those pieces out. And also, I have a podcast called Ordinary Equality. So we talk about it a lot, especially there's an episode with Charlotte where we talk about it. So folks want to know more nitty gritty, check those things out.
Fabulous. Thank you all. This was such an amazing panel. I'm going to kick it over to Carol, but before I do, I wanted to say that we are looking for more organizations, especially LGBTQ plus organizations, to be part of the coalition. And we are always looking for support for the work that we're doing. As a board member, I just want to say, support the work of Carol and Kimberly and Mona and everybody. So thank you all for attending, and kicking it back to Carol Jenkins, our CEO.
Drew, thank you so much. What a great board member you are. Thank you so much for extending the invitation. We're at 115 organizations now. Our ultimate goal is 500. And we're well on our way across, every single interest. The only thing you have to believe in is equality, period. And so, quoting Kate, I guess, one of our sayings will be, never again without women. We're going to change the Constitution. We're going to make sure that, and we will define what women means as well, of course, So it's a very expansive definition. We're delighted to be doing this work. What a great panel. Thank you all so much for being here today, and Drew, for your guiding of it in such a thoughtful way. We do want to point out that we are just a week away from that vote. So I do want to make sure that you know that this is essentially important for absolutely every thing that we're concerned about. Equality is at stake, no matter who you are, where you are in this country, because of things that have happened recently here. We all stand to lose our equality. And so this is really the time for us to go together, to go forward, to make sure that we can all have an equal future. And for all the panelists, I thank you so much from my family, my small grandchildren, who've got 2 moms. This is particularly important for them and for me, as well. If you need help in determining if your candidate supports women, we suggest that you go to our website, eracoalition.org/elect equality. We have our online tool. We have done a survey. We have got all of the senators who are running, all of the members of the House of Representatives who are running for office, and we now can tell you whether or not they support you, whether or not they support equality. So go to Elect Equality, go to our website, eracoalition.org. And while you're there, please sign our petition. We're almost at 5,000 signatures to tell the Senate, the US Senate, to take up SJ Res 6, which would remove the time limit on the ERA and would take us gigantic steps forward to equality. We can still press our US Senate to do some equality work, and I hope you will join us in doing all of that. Thank you, panelists, moderator, viewers, for being here today. I'm Carol Jenkins, the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality, saying thanks for joining us. We've got 2 more town halls coming up in November. We'll put the word out very shortly about them. Thanks so much. Good night.